Okay, so here we are, day 2, according to the New South Wales Police, in quarantine, although I'm in progress with my 3rd day. I arrived on Sunday, today's Tuesday, just finished doing some yoga, and I'm waiting for a knock on my door for lunch. I wanted to show you the view, but apparently when I videotape myself with the window behind me, it can either be my face or the view, but not both. So I'll show you the view at the end of this video. In the meantime, I thought I would answer some of the questions I've been having about my travels and how were they. So I booked my flight 2 months ago to come back, and it was not an easy flight to find. They were all very, very expensive, and they were few and far between. I wanted to come back on November 30th, and the only flight I could find anywhere close to that date was December 12th, and it was one way. I was allowed one checked piece of luggage, economy class, for a ridiculous sum of money that basically totaled the amount of what would normally be a round trip ticket with 2 pieces of luggage. It was, instead of a direct flight, Sydney, Vancouver, Vancouver, Sydney, as I normally do, I had to go through LA, 4.5-hour layover in LA, followed by Auckland and a 3.5-hour layover there, and then on to Sydney. When I got to the airport in Vancouver, it was all good. The check-in took forever, even though I was the 3rd person in line. So each and every person, they had to look at where your destination was and read the rules for that country and any countries you were strapping over, and make sure you had all the proper passports or visas, etc., for each and every person. So it took 5 to 10 minutes to check in one person. I had to fill in a form that I didn't know about, which was just a declaration for the LA airport saying I'd be wearing a face mask. They had to check both my passports, and then there was confusion because I had a Canadian passport and an Australian passport. If I traveled on Australian only, I would have needed a visa for the US, but I didn't need that because I had my Canadian passport. So made it through check-in, which did take quite some time. So I was glad I got to the airport almost 3 hours before my flight. And then got through the airport. Nothing was open other than 1 or 2 little restaurants, if that, in the duty-free, all closed. So waited it out, got on my flight. It wasn't overly crowded since not many people are flying between Canada and the US right now, so I had my row of 3 seats to myself, which was great. And when we arrived in LA, I was worried that the LA airport would be crazy and I'd have to go through security again, but it turned out we were shepherded off in what was Terminal 5. We're told to go to Terminal B, went down an escalator, and then we were in a tunnel for a very long time. I felt like we walked about a couple kilometers, with no windows, no doors, no nothing, but we didn't leave the secure area. So we just went through this tunnel, came out in Terminal B, which was pretty empty. Another international terminal, pretty empty. I was able to find a space by myself, away from anybody, and do a half an hour of yoga on my own, which was great. And then I was able to walk down the terminal towards my gate and find a big area with no one seated anywhere close to me. Stopped off and got a little dinner with a glass of wine and took it over to my little area, and was able to eat. And I originally had thought I'm going to wear this N95 mask in the LA airport. It's not coming off till I get back on an airplane because I felt that was going to be the riskiest place of my travels. Turned out it was fine, and I was comfortable taking it off to eat and putting it back on when I was done. So then we got on our plane. All the flights left on schedule, so that was good. Got on our plane. Now the LA to Auckland flight was far more crowded than I expected it to be. But that was because it was carrying passengers whose final destination was Auckland, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Sydney. The Melbourne flights had just opened up a couple days before because they just reopened their hotel quarantine. And so when the flight had looked quite empty when I looked at it 3 days earlier, a bunch of people apparently had gotten a phone call the night before the flight saying, if you want to get on this flight, you can, and go to Melbourne. So they added a bunch of people to the flight at the last minute that were for the Melbourne flight. So that means I did not get a row of 3 seats to myself for the long part of the flight. That was a 12-hour flight. There was someone on the aisle. I was on the window. We had the middle seat empty. Turned out he was the same guy that sat in front of me on the Air Canada flight and then sat in front of me again going from Auckland to Sydney. So if I was exposed to anybody in my travels, it was this one guy, and same thing for him. Upon arrival in New Zealand, all good. The Auckland passengers got asked to stay on and were told that they were going to go to Christchurch and be flown there. And that's where they would do their hotel quarantine. And at the end of their 14 days, they would be flown back to Auckland. So I was sort of happy that at least when I got to Sydney, I got to stay in Sydney. The people that were transiting were shepherded off the plane first, and we walked the whole length of the airport through tunnels again. We did have to go through security in New Zealand once more. And once we did that, we were in a small passenger terminal that was basically blocked off. There was no exits anywhere other than a departure gate. They did open the duty free for our flight, which was fantastic. So I was able to pick up my gin in the duty free in New Zealand because I knew that the duty free in Sydney was closed. So that was good. And then when we did get finally, after 3.5 hours, there was, you could order off a menu and they delivered the lunch down into our terminal on a trolley. So I had a little lunch. And when we did depart, we were shepherded downstairs and onto one of those airport buses, and this was the weirdest part. That was the one piece of travel where physical distancing wasn't even close. They crammed all of us onto one bus, and there were about 30 people on the flight, so it was a very empty flight, but they crammed us all onto this bus and then took us along outside all the distance we had walked the length of the airport, and I swear they took us back to the same airplane we had gotten off earlier in the morning. So we got back onto that plane. Like I say, only 30 people, because it was just the people going to Sydney. So the plane was very empty. We had lots of room. I was able to lie down and have a nap on that flight, which was great. And then we arrived in Sydney, and this is where it got really interesting. So we stayed on the plane while the police came on and gave their announcement about quarantine, which was fine. And then we got off and we had to go through biosecurity first, where they would take our temperature and ask us a few questions about COVID symptoms. And we did that. But when we got there, we stood in line. They're like, okay, well, we're just waiting for the plane ahead of you to clear. They didn't want the planes of people to mix. So we waited 5 minutes or so, and then they came around, took our temperature, asked our questions, and we went down the hallway and stood in another line just outside of immigration, where they said, well, we need to wait for that area to clear before we can let you in. So they did that, and then those people got through to baggage claim, and they let us in, and we stood in the line staring at the immigration officers for probably about 40 minutes. It was a long time. And you could look over into the baggage claim and see the people still standing in a line in the baggage claim waiting to go to customs, and they were not moving. So they were waiting for the flight ahead of them to clear. And that knock on the door was my lunch being served. I'll get to it in a moment. So we finally got through immigration after about 40 minutes, got to our bags, and I was like, mine was right there. All the bags were already on the trolley, so I got mine. I was first in line, so ready to go through customs, and was first in line, except that we weren't going anywhere. So we were waiting, I don't know, 30, 40 more minutes. Well, not only the plane in front of us cleared, but then they decided to have a shift change. So we had to wait for all the personnel to turn over before they let us through that. Once we got through that line, all of us were very quickly through customs, so there wasn't a lot to be declared on the entire plane, apparently. We all hopped on our bus. We were on there for about 5 minutes or so, and then we were on our way into the city. I happened to overhear them tell the bus driver, go to Pitt Street, the north end, which I knew would be the Sydney Harbour Marriott, and indeed that's where we pulled up to. So got this great hotel, which was great, except then we sat on the bus for over an hour while they waited for the plane ahead of us to be checked in. So the police came on, gave us all our forms and papers. We'd received some paper at the airport, received more paper on the bus, filled in a couple forms which we needed for check-in, and finally got to go and check in 2 or 3 people off the bus at a time. The hotel check-in part was quite smooth. Handed them the credit card, your passport. They handed you what would normally be your key card in a little envelope, except that there was no card in it, just the envelope with your room number. Then you walked over to a table that had 3 police sitting at it with their computers, and of course they went to check me in on their computers, and the computers went down. So waited another 10 minutes or so, not too bad. And they checked us in on the computer, and then they waved over a soldier from the military to say, this person will take you up to your room. So I previously identified my luggage outside. They had brought it in, then I identified it again, and he brings it on the elevator with me and takes me up to my room. He's got the key to the room, I don't. Lets me in the room, again, tells me sort of all the procedures around meals and garbage, etc. And put me in my room with my luggage. And in total, from the time I landed at the Sydney airport to the time I got into my room, it was 4.5 hours, and I was the first person in line for my flight. So it wasn't great, especially when you're jet lagged and tired, but it's the system that is working for Australia. They're not letting travelers with COVID out into the community, and there's not any COVID in the community. So it sounds awful, and yet it's a system that is working for them, and so it's not that I disagree with it at all. It works. So that's my tale for the day. I'll give you more about life in quarantine on day 3. Talk to you later. Oh wait, I almost forgot. We need to give you the view of the harbor today. It was very foggy this morning, and I'm trying to reverse my camera, but I can't. It was very foggy this morning, but it is clearing up, and we can see again. And so, whoops, there we have the view and a crane, but it's looking pretty good today. All right, talk to you tomorrow.